Hello, one moment. Hello, how are you? This is Barbara, and we are once again meeting in this beautiful, wonderful um, city of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And today I'd like to focus our attention on a very, very important concept, and that is the difference between victory, the concept of victory, and the concept of peace. There's a lot of conversations today, there are many conversations today about the need to be winning, about the attitude that losing has to be avoided at any price, that winning is the only answer, and if a person or group of people or nations don't win, then they are losers, and that is bad. And many people feel that there is something strange with that kind of attitude, because it's in contrast to the concept of peace. Peace is one of the um, concepts that clearly focuses on harmonious being, on the situations in which we can have predictability in our lives, in which we can create timelines and planning, and have sense of the future, of tranquility and peace. So a situation in which a person becomes caught up in this fear of losing is in contrast to the concept of peace. Now, we have a situation in which peace is impossible without winning, or even without losing, for those who want to be in this state of constant combat. So I think that in order for us to recover the primacy of desiring and creating peace, we have to understand the limits of constant desire and will to win. Because in a situation of combat, from which the concept of victory derives and is connected to it is fight in order to achieve a certain purpose, and then winners and losers create an outcome, and then we have a situation of dominance and surrender, and then hopefully peace is established. But if one combat leads to another combat, and then to another combat, and there is constant state of war, then there is no hope and there is no chance to ever have peace. And one of the most famous examples of this situation is in a very famous ideology of Marxism that created this constant duality of class warfare or all kinds of warfare situations in which peace is impossible, because peace is enjoyment of tranquility and harmony, and a situation in which a group of people or individuals can enjoy the nature of life. So we have to understand that we are in a state of war, because the political systems of many countries today are defined by voting. And there are very wonderful aspects of voting, but it is a warfare. It is a situation in which one group of people fights another group of people. So in order for us to understand the difference between combat, competitions, fight, and tranquility and peace, we have to create vision of peace without this situation of constant combat. How is that possible? That is something that depends on how we understand the concept of peace. In contemporary democracies, there is a situation very similar to what was created in Marxism, in which there is this constant duality between winners and losers in elections. In Marxism, it's winners and losers in class warfare. Some other ideologies create other kinds of combative situations. If we continue living in a situation of this constant combat, we cannot expect peace to come. There can be temporary reprieves, there can be temporary spaces in which people don't fight, but there is no peace in the sense that we can create predictability for long-term future. In America, the situation is very complex because the diversity of offices created also some situations in which there is no combat. And that is, for instance, in the way Supreme Court candidates are elected through decision making of a president that is an outcome of a combat, but he creates this stable situation in the court that counterbalances this constant combat of elections. This was very brilliantly devised by those who were creating system of elections in America and who understood the benefits but also dangers of the dualities that would create conflict within a nation or a country that would never be healed. So the stability of Supreme Court members appointed for life was meant to be a countermeasure to this. A very complex situation is in Congress, in which many people have to fight every 2 years, but because of a certain unwritten understanding of the voters, they kept being elected for many terms of office, and that created a certain form of stability for a while. But generally, there is instability created in contemporary world by that situation of constant political warfare, state of war in which people fight for each other in order to defeat opponents, but they can never rest in tranquility of predictability and stability. And I think we entered a situation today in the world that many people are searching for vision of peace. Many people have been very tired of this constant warfare. Many people want welfare, in other words, the stability of shield of life. And I'm all for it. I believe that true vision of peace always has nurture and nutrition and financial stability. A lot of the problems in contemporary world is caused by huge financial stresses on families, on individuals, on cities, on countries, on companies. Some companies are organized around principles of stability, and they don't have elections, they have predictability of outcomes. We have a situation like this in Google, who became an extremely successful company, and it is based on the concept of a vision of peace and stability. So success can be achieved through vision of peace. It doesn't have to be only achieved through this constant combat. And the world today needs the vision of peace while understanding that there has to be readiness for combat, but combat should not replace peace, because then it tires the nations and eventually tires the earth, life on earth, and people are unhappy, they get sick, they get stressed out, they fall apart, families fall apart, countries fall apart. So I think that in order for us to create a sense of stability in our lives, we have to rethink how we view foundations of politics, and we have to become very creative in ways to look at how rules and regulations are created for our daily life, and we have to also ask questions. Do we have to have this political combat, military combat, financial combat as the organizing principle for our lives? I asked that question years ago. As I told you, I have had to deal with a very traumatic situation from a time when there was combat in Poland between forces of social labor and the government, and martial law was imposed, and I was injured during a very dangerous situation. So ever since that time, my focus has always to be to find peace from that trauma. So I deeply understand that winning or losing would have not healed my trauma, that something was created in that time of combat that could only be healed by God's grace, doctor's skills, and by vision of peace. So in my life, I understand the difference between the combat that searches for victory and then rejoices in losing of the enemy, and the need for vision of peace in order to have life. I'm wearing today the great symbol of my favorite football player, Tom Brady, and I chose him as a person who understands the difference between combat action during competitions and then wonderful peaceful tranquility in other areas of his life. So he's an example of somebody who understands and embodies the need for both. And I think that in a situation in which we are today, in which some people decided to create trade wars over matters of tariffs, I think that we need to create vision of world trade peace, because the tariffs should not be the only way in which we organize and evaluate successes of international trade. Sometimes the trade wars are created by lack of understanding between domestic trade and international trade. They are two different fields, and the complexities of interactions in international relationships create opportunities that would not exist if we only focused on national trade, domestic trade. So international trade is always connected with questions of access and good relationships with those who allow trade between different countries, who allow development of commercial cooperation. So I think that before damage is done to America's finances and finances of other nations, we have to calm down and create vision of trade peace among all nations. It's worth the effort because it will create an alternative to combat attitude that may end up in destruction of the most beautiful companies and resources and commercial ways. I call some of those highways to commercial success. When you look at conversations about international trade today, you don't see the vision of commercial peace, only this vision of victory, winning and or losing. So we have to be aware that in a combat there may be winners, there may be losers, but there may be also destruction of of value and the need to start rebuilding, which may take generations. In a situation in which we have successful commerce of the contemporary world, we have to look at vision of peace that would continue that success without need to create another success based on destruction and combat. Which leads me to another important question. How do we define success? And I think that we need to think about this question of success in ways that would treasure stability, tranquility, and peace, and to create an understanding that combat is only necessary in a situation of totally irreconcilable conflicts in which people need to define the victory by fight. But fight shouldn't be the daily way of running businesses and economies and finances, because it creates the constant stress. People get sick, then we have to spend an enormous amount of money on healthcare system, and a general attitude of tiredness and restraint is created in which people are very unhappy. So I think that this analysis of the need to know the difference between constant combat and vision of peace is very hopeful for us, because if we know that the vision of peace is foundation for success in commerce, we don't have to ruin it by combat and wars. I think that another vital measure should be who would really be the winner in a combat that imposes huge tariffs, and then no one can find markets to sell the products because the tariff is so big that it's not worth for the receiving markets to pay for it. So I think that in today's world we have to understand that we need to develop the guiding map of vision of peace in finance, in international relations, in commercial transactions. We can do it. We have done the mapping of the whole world in geographic diversities. We can develop multidimensional understanding of finance and commerce that would focus on long-term creation of peaceful relationships between nations, and also create space for people to take risks and develop new products, but that should be understood as part of the vision of peace, and it should not be punished if there is failure, because a certain risk is necessary to test the grounds of commerce. In closing, I encourage you to abandon that attitude of constant war and trade, to rethink the measures of tariffs, and I would do it at the international level. That would be an opportunity for many nations to utilize easy access to each other through internet. We can do it, and I encourage you to do it so that we continue this wonderful success of modern world in which the younger generations want to live in peace, but they don't know how to define it, and they don't know how to create vision of peace that would not be constant combat. Because that is another danger, that people think that the only way to create peace is by constant winning. And those should be two different areas of our thought. We should understand that tranquility and peace and harmony should be the foundation. While we need to deal with combat, but it should not be the replacement of combat-free life. Thank you so much for listening to me today. I hope that you benefited from those reflections, and I'll be looking forward to talking to you next week for another edition of Happiness and the City with Barbara.